To order rational numbers from least to greatest, the first thing that I would do is I would make sure that they are all in the same form. My preference is to change them all to decimals because it's a lot easier to compare decimals than fractions to decimals. So I'm going to start with the numbers up here that are not in decimal form. -5/4. I know that that's the same as -1 and 1/4. And so I know that 1/4 is the same as 25/100. So I would write that as -1.25, -1 and 25/100. The next fraction up here, 5/2, I can say that that's the same as 2 and 1/2. So as a decimal, I would write it as 2.5. -13/3, that's going to be negative. 3 goes into 13 4 times. That gets me to 12. So I've got 1 left over out of 3. As a decimal, that's -4.3 repeating. So now that I have them all in decimal form, I'm going to put them in order from least to greatest. I'm going to start with my negative numbers because my negative numbers are smaller than my positive numbers. So if I take all of these negative numbers, what would be the biggest number if it were positive is going to be the smallest number when they're negative. So if these were all positives, 4.3 repeating would be the biggest. So I know that -4.3 repeating is going to be the smallest number I have up here. Now I also want to write that in its original form. So I'm going to write that as -13/3. All right. My next number, I'm going to cross that off so I don't use it again. The next number that would be the biggest if it were positive would be 3. So since it's negatives, that one's going to be the next smallest number, -3. I'm going to do two versions here. The bottom one has the original form. The top one has all the decimals. I'm left with -1.25 and -0.2. So I know that if they were positives, 1.25 would be bigger. So that means that as they're negatives, -1.25 is going to be smaller. And in its original form, I would write -5/4. The only negative one I have left is -0.2. So now I'm going to move on to my positive numbers. I have 4.31 and 2.5. Since 2.5 is smaller, I'm ordering these from least to greatest. I would write that. If I'm using the original form, this was 5/2. So the only remaining number I have is 4.31. So this is the numbers ordered from least to greatest. Now if I was going to mark these on a number line, graph these on a number line, I would start by making a number line and looking at what kind of numbers I'm going to have on here. My smallest number is -4.3. So I'm going to put integers on my number line, and I'm going to go back to -5. My biggest number is 4.31, so the integer that comes after that would be +5. So I'm going to number my number line from -5 to +5. Notice how the negative numbers are kind of like a mirror image of the positive numbers. All right, so I'm going to start with -4.3 repeating. I know it's going to be between -4 and -5, not quite to the halfway mark. So I'm going to put a dot there, and then I'm going to label that -13/3. The next one I have, looks like I wrote something down incorrectly. This was supposed to be -3. So -3 is going to be right on -3 on my number line. -5/4 is -1.25. So I know it's between -1 and -2. Halfway would be here, and 0.25 is 1/4 of the way. So I'm going to label that -5/4. -0.2 is going to be between 0 and negative 1, closer to 0. 5 halves is 2.5, so halfway between 2 and 3. And lastly, 4.31, not quite halfway between 4 and 5. So we've ordered these numbers from least to greatest, and we've graphed them on a number line.